There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads, taped on Thursday afternoon. The most exciting personal news I have for you is of a very bookish biblio-adventure type, and that is that I did, as I told you about last week, conduct my first live on-stage interview at the bookstore up the street for the book launch of Sharon Battala's new memoir, which is a wonderful memoir, How to Breathe Water. I put the video up about an hour before I went to the bookstore and had a similar conversation with her, but in front of a packed house, including my mum and my friend Kathy and a bunch of others, and the literati of Saskatoon, including David Carpenter, who I have a series of interviews with on my channel, and I got good feedback on it. I'm not the next insert name of literary interviewer here, but I wasn't nervous. As soon as I started speaking, I wasn't nervous. And I did well, I have to say. That was great. I had the picture hanging party on Saturday, Kenji and I did, and so almost all of the art that I wanted to put up is now up, and I, for whatever reason, am not feeling ready to give you the tour, but that might be coming soon. And that's about it for personal news. This is a very BookTube-centric, very special mystery guest. And this week's mystery guest is the fabulous writer, Joe O'Malley, joining us from New York City, here to talk about his debut novel, Starlight and Moonshine, coming out September 9th. And he is also the author of a 2019 collection of short stories, Great Escapes from Detroit, which I have in my hot little hands, but I have not yet read. Joe, welcome.
Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. And it's so great to finally meet you because you have another identity with which I'm much more familiar. Tell us about your BookTube channel, Joe.
I have a channel. My character, Too Tight Lautrec, has a channel in which I am in drag, and she talks about all kinds of literature. It started out as a poetry channel with a series of 13 episodes where she's hidden out in the sub basement of PS 75, the Emily Dickinson School, and she talks about how poetry is for everyone. And so each week she would present a poem and talk about it briefly. And then that morphed into me talking about different things, sometimes fiction, sometimes drama, sometimes Shakespeare during Shake-Tember. And I did an entire series all on Shakespeare's sonnets from 1 to 154, where I presented each one, or she presented each one. And now I'm doing we're doing, I'll do the royal we as the queen. So now we're doing a series about all the Pulitzer Prize winning fiction of which I have never heard. So we'll skip over things that I know about or things that I've heard of, even if I'm familiar with the author and haven't read the book, or if I've heard the name of the book but don't know the author. I have to not know the author or the book, and then I read it and talk about it so it's my forgotten Pulitzer. I've set that on pause for a moment because it's a lot of reading and I'm not that fast of a reader. And also in the midst of doing the edits for my book, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And by the time this video goes live, we're pre-taping it. You'll be in the midst of a book launch and all that stuff.
Yes, but I don't know how intense that's going to be. It's a small publishing company and we don't have any events planned. So it's going to be...
You and me, and I'm sure Too Tight Lautrec
yes.
Interview you or something like that?
I'm trying to figure that out, yes.
Yeah. Your interesting use of pronouns and kind of splitting of your identity. So what is Too Tight Lautrec like to work with, Joe?
She's a bitch. I came up with her. She actually appeared in a short story that I had written. A gay male editor told me, a gay writer, that my work was too gay for a general audience because of something that I had sent. So from that point forward, for the next year or 5, I wrote only gay stories. And one of them was a story called The Manly Man's Guide to Virtue, and about someone who reluctantly becomes a drag queen and his ghosts, not real ghosts, but like ghosts that appear in the smell. You smell something and then you're reminded of someone you've lost or love, or you see a particular way somebody's walking and that sort of haunts you. And so as he's on the stage as Too Tight-Lautrec, these people in his life that he's lost come to push him to go beyond where he thought he may not have gone. And it was actually inspired by the short story Gryphon by Charles Baxter. Do you know that story?
I don't. I know the author's name.
Amazing. It's amazing. It's told in the first person narration of a young boy. And it's about this substitute teacher who comes to his classroom and talks about things that probably are not completely appropriate for a grade school class. And it's just crazy and it's good. And so that was the impulse for that story, to just whatever. So having written that, I thought, what if I brought her to life? What would she look like? So she's different from what I had in the story. Anyway, that was the genesis, because I thought I want to see something I've never seen, which is a drag queen talking about something important. I also wanted people maybe to tune in because of the drag and then stay for the poetry.
Or even vice versa.
And I figured it'd be better than just having plain old me talking about stuff.
I'm not sure about that, but it is very entertaining and very erudite. And so fascinating overlap, or kind of what's the word I'm looking for? I'm grasping for the right word. The fact that it was your writerly self that perhaps inadvertently gave birth to your booktube self, or gave birth to Too Tight-Lautrec. And has the channel similarly fed your writing?
My hope was that because I'm not a poet, but some of my best friends are poets. But my goal in the first series was to actually memorize all the poems that I presented. And that was also to distract myself from obsessive thoughts about things I shouldn't be thinking about, death and dying and sadness, et cetera, et cetera. And it does work when you're in the middle of thinking about something that you can't change, to start to think about a poem and try to remember it word for word. And so in doing that, I had hoped that by virtue of the fact that I'm memorizing poetry, something will seep into my language skills. And not knowing if it did or didn't, I just hope that it does. And in the meantime, I came across quite a few wonderful poems, and I'm so grateful for it, because it's just been amazing. And also I've done on the channel, I think, over 100 lip syncs of actors and actresses and poets reading their poetry, and doing that to try to match their intonation. It brings it into my body in a way that wouldn't be there. And I hope that it somehow transforms my ability to convey things in language. That is a hope, and I hope it continues.
You said a moment ago about trying to distract. I don't think you used the verb distract, but to stop the obsessive thinking about death and sadness. There was a few other things you mentioned there. If that kind of thinking is obsessive, I'm sure that it can become a burden. However, I also want to kind of segue into Starlight and Moonshine, which is very much about grief and love and death, among other important topics like sex and booze and Detroit. So
yes.
Introduce Starlight and Moonshine to us.
And this isn't a spoiler, because you learn this on the first 2 pages. It's about the year in the life of a family in which the mother, the matriarch, dies in a drunk driving accident, and she's the drunk driver. And it starts a year out from her death. And there are 6 members of the family, and it's each family member's experience or memory of that year in that life. And it goes backward in time to the day, and also like forward in time and way back in time. So it covers, and it's in 1980. So it covers it actually goes even maybe to present day and back to the 50s. because it's multi-generational, and it's mostly about family relationships, and what we know about each other and what we know about ourselves isn't always really clear. Here I am presenting myself as Joe O'Malley in, I hope, the best self that I can, but what I don't know is how somebody else may be perceiving me. We never know how other people are perceiving us. We have this idea that we walk around with in our heads that isn't necessarily, it may be true, but my truth is different from someone on the street's truth about me.
You were born and raised in Detroit.
I was.
The opening of the story is 1980 Detroit. Give us a sense of Detroit in 1980.
It was before the great exodus of jobs from the American industry. And so Detroit is a very multicultural city. I was probably more lower middle class, but I used my neighborhood that I grew up in. My neighborhood was called Brightmoor, which is now called, the nickname is Blightmoor, because it's every fourth or fifth house is burnt to the ground or abandoned. And when Detroit went bankrupt around 2016, there were two people running. I won't mention one person's name, but they toured the city to see what was going on, just because they wanted to see the worst part of Detroit, and that was my neighborhood, which wasn't like that when I was younger. But so Detroit in 1980 was booming, a great place for music, a shithole at the same time, lots of racial problems, but also lots of people of all races together. So it makes it even like better, because like you are able to see that people are just people. And so it's a very strange time.
How much did nostalgia play into the writing process for you?
I don't really experience nostalgia in the sense that, oh, I wish I were back there. So these started out as short stories, because at the time I really only liked writing short stories, and I really only liked reading short stories. I was at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and I wanted to write about someone working. Frank Conroy at the time said, it's always interesting to see somebody what they do when they're working in a story. And I had a job in housekeeping in a hospital, and I thought, well, that'd be interesting. That was my only impetus. I don't know where the death came in. I do, actually. I had a crush on a guy who was straight, and I found out that he was from the same hometown where my parents grew up, in the thumb of Michigan. Because I was at a party one time, and I offered him a drink, and he said, I don't drink. And I thought, what are you talking about? You don't drink? I didn't understand. So I told my mother about this guy, and she said, oh, yeah, his parents both died in a drunk driving accident. Oh. And they were the drunk drivers. And that's always haunted me. And I thought, what must that be like? And like all stories, that's how everything starts with me, is what must that be like? And then whatever flotsam and jetsam were floating around in my mind, I tried to pull everything together. And then once I had finished that story, I thought, that's it. But that family nagged at me. There's an 18-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 22-year-old. Mary is the 22-year-old, Colleen is 20, and Jack is 18. And so I wrote Mary and Colleen's, the other two kids' stories. And I thought, okay, that's it. That's it. And I left Iowa and went to Rhode Island for a while, and then went to New York and didn't even touch it for a while. But then I thought, but what about the father and his sister, who's a piece of work, Aunt Adelaide? And then also, what about the mother? And so I just let them occupy my mind for a while. And I came up with something that seemed like it fit together. And that was it.
How queer is this book?
You'll find out.
Okay.
It's queer. It's got some queer, it'll satisfy your queer itch.
That was quite a cock tease. Thank you.
But it'll do it quite soon. You won't be edging.
Tell us a little bit more about the matriarch, Hannah.
She's the center of the family. She plays guitar and piano. She can play any instrument that she likes, but she's got a voice like wet garbage. And so she can't sing, but she would love to. And Colleen, the middle daughter, can sing quite well, and Jack can also play, and he can dance. The older sister, Mary, doesn't do any of those things, and her chapter is called Harmony as a result. But Hannah Fallon is the matriarch, and she likes to drink. So she makes dinner, and she opens a bottle of wine, and she finishes it by the time dinner is ready, and then opens the second bottle. And James and Hannah are the mother and father, and Adelaide, or Addie, Aunt Addie, doesn't like her and has never liked her because she's a pretty little skinny thing. And her line is that alcoholics are skinny because that's the only way they get nutrition. They don't really eat. Hannah knows how to draw people to her. They are just drawn to her, and she's a loving, wonderful person with a problem, with a drinking problem. The title, Starlight and Moonshine,
that was going to be my next question.
It seems vague, but when I was at Iowa, I was served something, and I said, "What is this?" And they said, "It's a Starlight Martini." And I've never found it anywhere else, and I've looked it up, and I can't find it anywhere. But it's 5 shots of vodka and 2 shots of black sambuca. So it's this kind of blackish, purplish concoction with the little lemon rind on top, which is the Starlight. So that's what Starlight is. And of course, moonshine is moonshine. So it's a double-edged, it's not really like Starlight and Moonshine, like angels and fairies. Well, it's a little bit of fairies, but it's the Starlight Martini that really does her in, which we don't know until a little bit later in the book.
I had Roz of the fabulous BookTube channel scally-daddling about the book on my channel a few years back to talk about and to rave about your short story collection, Great Escapes from Detroit. And one of the things that she said was that your character work is fabulous, that your characters, or many of your characters, seem ordinary, normal, but there is behind that maybe mask. I don't think she used the word mask, but underneath there's something quirky, maybe a bit dark, but something that you don't see at first blush, and that you gradually reveal that in a way that is not melodramatic. Do you agree with that characterization of your character work, at least in the short stories? And would you say that carries over into Starlight and Moonshine?
That's very kind of Roz to say something like that. I hope I'm not melodramatic. It's really difficult to assess one's own work. At least it is for me. I do know that the people I end up liking most are people who seem normal, and then they'll open up and you're like, whoa, and thank you. So that is a quality that I quite like. But also, we are all quirky and strange and have our inner whatever it is, not necessarily inner demons, but maybe inner demons. And everyone is normal in some way, shape, or form. And that's the thing about fiction, though. You want some sort of tension to draw you through. And as I was saying about this book, that you find out at the beginning that Hannah dies at the beginning, what happens at the beginning. And so my hope is that the tension is in trying to find out how we got to that point. And in a way that is maybe, I hope, normal, but not melodramatic, but maybe a little off. We're all a little off. I'm also interested in the ways, as I said before, we perceive ourselves and each other, and how it's never complete. And so I think maybe that thing that's off is when what's off becomes apparent to one character or another, or one character to oneself, about oneself. That revelation of here I am is an interesting thing to me. And I hope that does come through. I hope it comes through just in the way the characters are described, or the way that they interact with one another.
That's fascinating. You have talked about the early drafts of Starlight and Moonshine. Went back, I'm not sure how far back you were at the Iowa Writers, but I think it was some years ago. Did the stories that are in Great Escapes from Detroit, did they come later, or was it all in parallel?
They're all over the place. When I'm working, I often sometimes in the middle of something, I start to work on something I shouldn't be working on. And they came whenever I had exhausted. Also, I have sometimes when I'm right, I try to tackle a certain problem that I think I may have. There was a time where it seemed like every story I wrote ended with somebody going to sleep, and I was like, which Manly Man's Guide to Fiction or to Virtue does. And so at one point I wanted someone to end up running or whatever. So there are writerly tasks that I give myself when I'm writing stories, but I stopped writing stories a while ago to write novels just to see if I could write a novel. And the first novel that I did write, I think, is more properly called an abortion than a novel. And that's the one that I was told you're too gay for a general audience. But I have two more novels that I have finished and that I am shopping around, which are very gay, super duper gay. And then I'm working on one right now that is not really gay at all, because I wanted to work on something different. The one novel that's very gay was inspired by the Edie Sedgwick book, edited by Gene Stein and George Plimpton. It's a fictional oral biography, Edie, American Girl. So that was inspired by that. But it's a gay boy. His name is Boy for reasons that I won't go into. And then the second one is about 1963 New York, about a 15-year-old boy who's caught in an act, in a gay act, and ends up running away from home, or running from Queens to Manhattan, and ends up with this group of people. And it's all 1963, 1964 New York. Because I wanted to write something in third person rather than in first person. Starlight and Moonshine, only one of them is in third person, but most of the chapters are first person. So sometimes I have a task that I give myself. And so that book was to write in third person. And this one I'm working on now is a comedy of manners, I hope. Because I just want to be, I just need peace. I need a good book for bad times.
Now, I want to ask you what you have been reading recently that you'd like to recommend.
It's a little daunting trying to recommend a book to you that you may have never read.
Oh, it doesn't matter if I haven't read it. No.
But so I did come up, the first thing that I will recommend is a book called Infinite Dimensions, which is a book of short stories by Jessica Treadway. And if you don't know her, she is amazing. She's written novels, but this is her latest, is Infinite Dimensions. And talk about characters who seem normal and then you find out there's something off. This is just her thing. Her prose is crystal clear. There's nothing like super fancy about it. She's just so interesting as a writer. Her stories, this book, Infinite Dimensions, seems to be about good people or normal people who make very bad decisions or do bad things. And the tension of just reading this and thinking, oh, please, no. But then you just can't help it. And she also has this quality of characters who, as the saying goes, characters who go there. And she's nothing like any of the other writers I'm going to mention, which is William Trevor, but William Trevor does that same thing where he has characters in conversations and then they approach or they broach subjects that you think in polite society may not be broached, or they think things that, oh, okay, I'm glad we're here, but I would never have thought that we'd be here. And the other person is Edith Wharton, where there's this dread, like you see a situation evolving and you just think, oh, no. And that's what keeps you reading, to see how this is going to resolve and if it's going to be what you think it is or if it's not going to be. But on top of everything else, they're funny. So those combination of things is, for me, funny. I need funny for most things. And yeah, Infinite Dimensions by Jessica Treadway. And then, as I say, I've been doing this Forgotten Pulitzer series, and I've read 3 books that I think are really good. The last one that I've read is Now in November by Josephine Johnson. Have you heard of it?
I have not. I think I might have heard the author's name once or twice, but that's it.
She's the youngest person to ever win a Pulitzer, and it's amazing. It's set in 10 years in the Depression and the Dust Bowl. And I just recorded the video for this, but I haven't started posting again. I may not post until September or October, but it's just gorgeous. The nature, when you hear the term nature writer, you might think, oh, great. But this is different. Nature is a character in this book, and her ability to merge her characters into whatever's going on in the world, in her world. At the end of every Two Tight thing, I say, the world is full of wonder, pay attention. This is this book. This was made for me. This is how you pay attention to the world. It's amazing. And she also wrote, which I haven't read yet, I guess it's called The Inland Island, which is about a year on her farm in Ohio. So I want to read that, and that's essays. And then I'll just mention two other ones that were winners for the Pulitzer thing. Early Autumn by Louis Bromfield and Laughing Boy by Oliver Lafarge. Those were the best of the books that I've read for the series so far. And I've read some stinkers too, which I will not name.
We'll do another episode on the stinkers.
But I want to ask you, because I know that you and I share, as far as Jane Austen is concerned, Emma is also my favorite book, which I heard you say, because she's a little bitch, and I like that, and I'm a little bitch, and I like the snarkiness.
That I relate to that, yes.
But I like the snarkiness, I like the funniness, I like the intelligence of her, and it's also a novel about a character educating herself. It's that thing that I really love. Someone who thinks that they know about themselves and then learns that they are not what they thought. They are something completely different. And it's also a comedy of manners, which I'm looking for. And I just read Barbara Pym, thanks to you and Roz. I just read Excellent Women for the first time and absolutely loved it. So I want to know if you have any recommendations for comedy of manners, good books for bad times.
Oh, fascinating. I'm so delighted that you loved Barbara Pym. Excellent Women is not on my list of maybe my top 4 favorites. It's excellent. It was a 5-star read, but there's others I loved even more than that. Really? Other comedies of manner. Oh, I guess because I don't really think in terms of genre like that, I think I might come up blank. Comedy of manners.
Well, just a book about manners. So Edith Wharton would never fit into that category. Those are novels of manners, but they certainly aren't comedies where there are happy endings or marriages. What about Frances, is that her name, Frances Burney?
I was just thinking about Evelina, but it's been so long since I read it that I'm trying to remember. Was it funny? Anyway, it was a great novel. I would like to reread it and read more by her. I think all of hers are chunksters, and she was a lady in waiting to either King George, I think, to Queen Charlotte, and there's 12 volumes of her diaries of court life that are out of print, and you can't unless you find them in a dusty library. I hope they'll all be brought back into print because I would lap that shit up.
Wow, sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I can't think of any others.
I do consider all of Jane Austen's books comedy of manners. So. And I guess that's the thing. There's nothing else like her. Maybe there are modern. I don't know. I don't read that much contemporary literature.
I do think Barbara Pym is definitely, at least most of them, and she's compared to Jane Austen. The comparison only goes so far. But in terms of all the other British women writers of that era that I love, none of them are particularly comedic. And I can recommend one that's a Canadian novella. But is it a comedy of manners? I don't think so. Are people writing comedy of manners today?
I don't know. I'm saying I am, but those are just words too. This is my template, and I want it to be anything is manners, isn't it? The way that you and I are talking to one another, we have certain kinds of manners that we are displaying or transgressing. We'll swear or we won't.
Manners are the absence thereof.
Yeah.
So I'll throw this out, even though if I'm not sure it quite is going to land, but Canadian novella, another friend of my channel's, her name is Barb Howard, and her novella is called Happy Sands, and it's about a massage therapist and her family that every year they drive from Calgary out to the coast of BC to a kind of falling down ramshackle cabin resort. And she drinks too much, and she pays for her booze during that week of holidays by giving paid massages to the other people, other Canadians that go there every year. And it is very funny with dark and interesting character work. So you might like that one.
Okay. Sounds good.
Happy Sands by Barb Howard. On that happy note, Joe, it's been an absolute delight chatting with you. I can't wait to read Starlight and Moonshine as well as Great Escapes from Detroit and have you back for a really deep dive. I hope you'll come back for that. And I can think of about 1,000 other reasons to have you back. So I hope you will.
Thank you for having me.
The pub date for Starlight and Moonshine, Joe's new book, is a couple days later than Canada. So I haven't got my copy, but I pre-ordered it. So it should be coming tomorrow, I hope. And that sounds like a really interesting read. And what a wonderful conversation Joe and I had. First of many, I hope. And I must get back to following his videos more regularly, and so should you. His Pulitzer project in particular sounds fascinating. All right, in terms of the week in review, I did put up the one video last Friday, a few hours after the Friday reads went up, and that was my long-form chat with Sharon about her memoir, How to Breathe Water. So that is there for your viewing pleasure. I have finished 3 books and 1 essay, and I'm going to check in on a few others. Oh, and by the way, I have bookmarks for sale. My budget is such that the only way I can really buy any more books in the foreseeable future is if you buy some of my bookmarks or sponsor me on Patreon. So I also have a Patreon account. And in fact, if you join my Patreon right away, the book club I have there, we're discussing a work of nonfiction. Not this Saturday, but the Saturday next, the 27th. A work of nonfiction called Embers of the Hands, Hidden Histories of the Viking Age by Eleanor Barraclough. So if you've already read that book or think you can read it and join Patreon before Saturday, September 27th, please join in the fun. All right. I have finished the collection of ghost stories by Edith Wharton, aptly titled Ghosts, in the NYRB edition. This was for a Zoom chat, which was recorded last Sunday night, between the Edith Wharton fan club members, which is Chris of the Book Cougars podcast, Dorian of One Bright Book podcast, and James of Caustic Cover Critic fame. And a couple of them had a different edition that didn't have one story that we had here and had another story that we didn't have, which is weird because according to the copyright information, this was published during Edith Wharton's lifetime in 1937. So I don't know why there's a difference in what's included, but that's fine. The important thing to say is I really liked it. Some of the stories I actually loved, and they were creepy. And the first question I asked in the chat, which is going to take probably 6 months to edit and get to you because I have such a backlog, was I asked everybody, what was the creepiest story? What was the scariest story? And that was a good way to start the discussion. So some of these were quite creepy, and it made me remember that I was really into ghosts and the occult and psychic phenomena when I was a preteen. Some of these stories reminded me that there's a part of me that's really drawn to the occult. And, of course, Edith Wharton is one of the greatest writers who ever wrote, and so they're all beautifully written. Reading them as I did over such a short span of time, some of them got a little samey, but this was a big success for me. Stay tuned, if you can stay tuned for several months, for the rousing discussion the Edith Wharton Book Club members and I had about ghosts. I have also finished this Japanese novella, Hunchback by Saou Ichikawa, translated from the Japanese by Polly Barton. And my reaction to this book is a bit complicated. I haven't decided what kind of a star rating I'm going to give it. 3 or 4, I would say. Probably a 4. This is her debut novel, and she lives with the same physical disability that the protagonist does, a congenital muscle disorder. So in a way, it's not autofiction, but she's writing about a lot of things that were true in her own life, and I think making a whole bunch of stuff up. And I think I respected this more than I liked it. I'm not sure it's a book that's going to stay with me. And by the way, this is for the novella project with Calgary writer Barb Howard. It's one of the novels that I assigned us to read. And I think we're going to have a pretty darned interesting chat about it. But the protagonist, Shaka, she has various strands of identity, and many of them are very, very online. She writes pornography, and she is doing a PhD or a master's. She is independently wealthy, based on the inheritance from her family, so that she owns the independent, what would you call it? The place where she lives, where there's a staff of attendants to help its disabled residents live as independent of a life as possible. She actually owns it. Shaka is a fascinating protagonist, I think because so much of it was online, and so much of it was factual descriptions of her reality, and very close-up descriptions of how her disability affected her, what she looked like, how she went about her day. It was all very interesting, read a little bit too factual rather than fictional, if I can put it that way. And her fantasy is, here's the tweet, I've just flipped to the right page by accident. This is the tweet she sends out. My ultimate dream is to get pregnant and have an abortion, just like a normal woman. And so what little plot there is here centers on that, because one of her new male attendants offers to help her out with that, and plot ensues. It is, in places, very sexual. Certainly it's an eye-opener. I can't really say that I enjoyed it, but I did appreciate it. And just last night I finished reading the title essay from this collection of essays by the Irish poet Eavan Boland, A Journey with Two Maps, Becoming a Woman Poet. So I've already talked about this essay, and I got maybe partway into the second essay when I started reading this for the Irish Readathon, maybe last year, 2024, I think. And again, just got overcommitted, so it got set aside. But I thought Mary Jean would appreciate it because she's really into art. And this essay is about Eavan Boland's mother, who was an artist. Not a famous artist, but an artist of some renown, I think, at least locally in Dublin. And her happening upon a painting that her mother did, but upon which her mother's mentor signed his name, not hers. And that sets off an intellectual and emotional examination of the principle of authorship as an artist, as a poet, and the I and the we of authorship, and how it affects the I, how the we affects the I. I think even on a second reading, a fair amount of it still went over my head, but the writing is so lovely, and I think it's one I need to read maybe 3 more times before I can talk intelligently about it. But I do recommend it to you if you're interested in any of that stuff, especially if you're interested in art and or poetry, and how a poet or an artist thinks of who is the author of this piece, or why not both, the I and the we. It's really fascinating. If Mary Jean wishes, we might use this as a palate cleanser in between subsequent books, read an essay each time, but we'll see about that. But I do want to keep reading this beautifully written, fascinating essay collection in the fullness of time. And finally, I finished a novel that I started for Spinster September last year and finished for Spinster September this year. Put on hold for months, not because I wasn't enjoying it, just because, as I've said how many times already in this video, I tend to get overwhelmed and things get put on the sidelines. It was wonderful to pick this back up. This is The Mrs. Mallett by E.H. Young. This was a wonderful novel. I have actually just recorded a full review, so I'm going to keep my comments brief. If you're interested in more details, please check that out. I'm going to put it up before the end of September so that it gets up within the boundaries of Spinster September. It's about 3 sisters. 2 of them are elderly. The third one is much younger, but she is middle-aged. They're all spinsters. And then a niece that comes to live with them. So those are the Mrs. Mallett. There's 4 of them. None of them have married. All of them are flirtatious and are interested in relationships with men, but for whatever reasons, they don't want to marry or haven't gotten married yet. And so it's a fascinating fictional examination of spinsterhood and human relationships, in the sense, really one of the most profound parts of the plot was the fickle nature of how these women felt about each other to a certain degree, but especially the men in their life. And the only other thing I'll say is that the male characters in this novel are also incredibly well drawn. E.H. Young's, what's that stand for? Emily Hilda Young. Her dates are 1880 to 1949. This was published in 1922. I read her last novel, 1947, Chatterton Square, and her writing style had gone a little bit Jamesian, which I use only in the negative sense. I don't think it's possible to talk about James's late writing style in a positive sense. And she got a little bit too, not overwrought, but her writing style got to the point where the headache that reading that novel, Chatterton Square, was not as fabulous as it was just tedious. But there was still a lot of gold, so I kept on going. I have a full review of it. But I would have rather that it had been written in this style. This was a joy to read. There's a lot of good stuff in here. Stay tuned for my full review. All the books I said I've started last week and in recent weeks, I'm just not ready to check in on very many of them, but I will check in on Platonic Love by Scott Watson, 3 Tales of Language and Desire. It's a very gay collection of stories. I read the first story yesterday, called Larry, and it was a very relatable story about, I guess we'd call it like a fuck buddy relationship, or a not particularly romantic relationship, but a very sexual relationship that the protagonist has, probably set in the 1970s or something. This collection was published in 1981. The protagonist gets the hots for this beautiful blonde young man, they're both in their 20s or something, on the scene, and that young man is confused about his sexuality, and they do some sexual exploration, but maybe even more importantly, the protagonist has really quite deep reflections on the nature of desire. And he misremembers the Platonic definition of beauty. He first renders it in the text this way: beauty is certainly a soft, smooth, slippery thing, and therefore of a nature which easily slips in and permeates our souls. And that kind of carries him through some of the first interactions, first meetings and sexual encounters he has with this beautiful young man named Larry. But then later in the story, he realizes that he had the quote a little wrong. He looks it up again and realizes he hasn't remembered it correctly or written it down in his notebook correctly. Here is what it's supposed to be. The beautiful is friendly. Certainly the friendly has the appearance of something soft and smooth and slippery, and probably it is from being of this character that it slides and slips through our fingers so easily. So those 2 quotes reverberate through the story here about the possibility or impossibility of friendship between 2 men who are lusting after each other or confused. One in particular, the object of the protagonist's desire, is very confused about his sexuality and how all that shakes out or doesn't shake out in a way that was very relatable to me when I was a young gay man and everybody wanted to jump my bones. It's quite overwritten in places, but it's also really beautiful and thoughtful in places. So that's my preliminary thoughts on Platonic Love by Scott Watson. I thought about bailing on About Uncle by Rebecca Gisler. Is that how it's pronounced? Gisler, probably French. Translated from the French by Jordan Stump. Because the first scene is about this uncle. The first person narrator is this old uncle's niece. She's moved to a small town at the seaside to take care of him, and he's on the toilet and has made a terrible mess in the bathroom. And that's all described in gory detail. And then the second chapter is him sitting in the kitchen or the dining room, and the way he eats is gross. He's sneezing and coughing up his omelet all over the place, and it's just grotesque. And I'm thinking, if there's one more scene like that, I'm not going to read this. But thankfully, the next chapter or scenes or whatever were more interesting. So that's all I'm going to say about it. I think I'm in it for the long haul now. My friend Jo Smith, I think I'm remembering correctly that she said she really liked it. Maybe she has a stronger stomach than me, but we'll keep going with it. All right. The only thing I'm going to start this week, now that I have finished Hunchback for the novella project, is one of the ones that Barb Howard assigned me, and it's really a short story. I'll probably read it in about an hour. Madeline Miller's Galatea, which will be interesting for me because I loathe myth retellings, and that's what this is. So, I got over my ghost allergy. Am I going to get over my myth retellings allergy? What do you think? Time will tell. That's it. Thanks for watching.